Cool. As you can imagine, there are lots of little assets out there that people dispose of. And you can imagine HMRC having to grapple with some very simple ones and wondering what the point is. If you like, maybe the cost exceeds the benefit, all the red tape and all the paperwork involved. So, first of all, we're not talking about buildings here or key assets, no. Um, what HMRC sort of then do is sort of say, okay, you know what, listen, we will argue that there are some things that we're not interested in. And so we refer to these things, when I say not interested in, to a certain extent, but I'll break that up again. We start off by calling them chattel. So they're movable. That's the key point. They are movable property. So we're not talking about buildings. We're not really talking about plants and machinery, but I'll come to that. So, and we're also not, they are tangible. So we're not talking about shares. So not shares. Shares are not an issue. Remember, we have some assets that are exempt anyway. So these aren't exempt by default, but then they do fall under the case of ignoring them or not being interested in them. So we now have typically this idea of wasting chattel, and so these are movable items. You can see everything here is movable. But the question here is we have wasting chattel and non-wasting chattel. So already remember we have certain assets that are just exempt, full stop. Premium bonds, cash, vintage cars, they're just exempt. Here we have scenarios where we have we now split another almost like breakdown of assets into two types, wasting and non-wasting. So non-wasting means that we expect them to last for less than 50 years. Expected life is less than 50 years. So caravans, boats, animals, just exempt. We're not interested. Just not interested. But of course, we have certain movable assets like antiques, jewelry, paintings that we are interested in because that is where the money is. So just to kind of go through very quickly, just this page, just so you can see what's going on here. Dimitri has made the following disposals in the year. He sells an antique vase for 10,000. So yes, this is a chattel and it is expensive, and we are interested in it. Piece of land, yes, but this is not chattel because remember it's not movable. He bought the land for 2,000. So yes, we're interested in this. Is fully taxable when we deal with it. Sold a parrot, we're not interested. It's an animal. It's wasting chattel. Vintage cars, we're not interested. This was just an exempt asset. This was not even chattel. This was just an exempt asset. Cars are just exempt assets. Qualifying corporate bonds, we're not interested. From the get-go, we highlighted the fact that these were exempt as well. They have a special sort of exemption to do with them. Right, so that's the key point. So now that we've gotten rid of the ones that we're just not interested, as in the wasting chattel, we now want to focus on the non-wasting chattel. So these are things that are greater than 50 years. And then the question here becomes, okay, which ones can we exclude entirely? So this really becomes a matter of proceeds and cost. So scenarios where everything is greater than 6,000, if both things are greater than, sorry, here we are less. If it's less, if we're talking about things you bought for less than 6,000, sold for less than 6,000, totally exempt. We're not interested. Just not interested. The rules get sort of funky around here. But if they're both greater than 6,000, so you bought it for more than 6,000, sold it for more than 6,000, yes, carry on as normal. It is chargeable. And we'll see examples in a second. But if we now have a scenario where you have, so ultimately HMRC are here trying to, minimize your gain, and that's a good thing. Minimize your gain so that you don't have to pay too much tax. At the same time, minimize the loss you can claim. So that's what these two are really about. Sorry, minimize your gain for this one and minimize your loss for this one. And you'll see how this works when I go through it. So let's look at this. Let's just jump into this. This is 6,000 ceiling, but let's look at how this works. So Shan sold a sculpture for 10,000, acquired it for 900. Cost of disposals 300. So that is it's a sculpture. So what are we dealing with here? He sold a sculpture for 10 grand. So ordinarily what we would do is we would say, okay, 10,000 less the cost of disposal, so that's 10,000 minus 300, so that's 9,700. Deduct the 900, and under normal circumstances, we would have 9,700 minus 900. Just do that in my calculator. You have 8,800, right? But because in this scenario, he acquired it for less than 6,000. So you can see there's quite a bit of a gain here. So HMRC say, okay, you know what we're going to do? We will assume to sort of, if you like, restrict this, that you actually bought the thing, if you like, for 6,000. So therefore, your gross proceeds are 10,000. We will assume you bought the thing for 6,000 to minimize, if you like, the gain here, and therefore the tax you would have to pay on that gain. And so we multiply this by 5/3. It's always been 5/3. I can never, there is no logic really to why it's 5/3, but it is. So we have 5/3 times that, and that gives you 6,667. So the question here is, who do you want to pay a gain on? Of course you want to pay a gain on the one that's less. So you have to do both options. Remember this, what I was saying here is the gross proceeds minus 6,000. So those are your gross proceeds. Deduct the 6,000 multiplied by 5/3. So that is the gain, the taxable, the chargeable gain, forgive me, that we will be looking at, right? So here, because we're trying to minimize that gain so that you don't pay as much tax, you can see here it is the lower of normal gain and the 5/3 times that. So again, just a bit of practice, I'm sure you'll pick that up, what's going on over there. So here we have a scenario where Darcy bought an antique chair for 6,500. So under normal circumstances, I mean, the HMRC do not want you to enjoy. So I mean, if they're helping you, if they're restricting the amount of gain, chargeable gain you have, well then you can expect that they restrict the amount of loss you can use. So, you bought a chair for 6,500. You sold it for 5,000. Under normal circumstances, this would look like this. You sold it for this. You incurred $250 to advertise it, and then then that's the cost, right? So you have 5,600 minus 250, and that's 5,350 minus 6,500, which is 1,150. So technically, this would be your loss, but this is not how it works. HMRC will restrict and argue that you received, instead of 5,600, that what you did was you actually sold it for 6,000. So they will say, okay, listen, you've sold it for 6,000. So 6,000 is the magic number. You sold it for 6,000. You've incurred that. That takes you down to 5,750. And you have an initial cost of 6,500, minimizing that loss, this 5,750 minus 6,500, minimizing that loss to 750. So that's how that kind of works its way. So this is loss. You can see here you only have 750 of a loss here as opposed to 1,150. And this is a pretty straight one here. Oops. Here you bought this for 16,250, you sold it for that. So in effect, 26,400 minus 16,250. Just subtract the two. They're both greater than 6,000, so there's no drama there. So that's what, 150, and that's 10. So you have a gain, chargeable gain of 10,150. And example 7, this is kind of looking at this from a loss point of view. Yes, so here you sold this thing for 8,200. You had to pay disposal costs of 50. That takes you down to 8,150. You bought it for 10,000, and you had additional acquisition costs of of 500. So in effect, that's your full cost. They're both greater than 6,000. So we deal with this as such. The original cost was greater than 6,000. You sold it, and that's still greater than 6,000. So overall, your loss is 2,350. So yeah, I think that's maybe a good let me see how much. Maybe I could actually. I'm just trying to see if I could wrap up in this, or do I pause? No, let's pause. I think it's good to just give you a bit of a break to just kind of settle, and then we'll finish in the last part in the last video.